They knocked on my door. Two men in black vests, with shiny badges. They called themselves HOA cops, and they said I broke the rules. Trash bins too close to the curb, lawn not green enough. And if I didn't pay up, right there, right now, they threatened to arrest me. But here's the thing, they weren't real cops. And what happened next shook the entire neighborhood. Welcome back to HOA Stories. I'm Daniel, just an ordinary homeowner in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I work from home, take care of my family, and try to live in peace. But in my neighborhood, the HOA never lets that happen. What started as a normal day turned into one of the strangest encounters of my life. The morning started quiet. Birds on the rooftops, sprinklers running on green lawns, the kind of silence that feels safe, almost too safe. But safety doesn't last long here. Not with the HOA. I had just poured myself coffee, hot steam rising, when the knock came. Not a normal knock. It was heavy, hard. The kind of knock that makes your heart race before you even open the door. When I pulled it open, there they were, two men in dark vests, black caps with the word police stitched in white, and across their chest, bold letters, HOA cops. Their faces were stone cold, no smile, no warmth, only power. One of them flashed a badge, shiny, but something about it felt wrong, too new, too fake, like it was bought from a costume store. "Sir, you're in violation," one of them said. His voice was sharp, rehearsed, like he had practiced it in front of a mirror. I just stood there with my coffee, blinking, confused. Violation? For what? He pointed to the curb. My trash bins, standing in the same spot they always did, too close to the street, against community code. I wanted to laugh, but his face told me not to. He wasn't joking. The other man stepped forward, tall, broad shoulders. He held out a clipboard, pages full of scribbles and fake seals. "This is a serious fine," he said. $500, cash, today. My stomach twisted. 500 for trash bins? I asked them to show ID, real ID. That's when they smiled. Not a friendly smile, the kind of smile wolves give before they bite. "You don't want to make this difficult," the tall one whispered. "Pay the fine, or things will get ugly for you in this neighborhood." I could feel my hands shake around the coffee mug, the steam rising, my mind racing. Ugly. In this quiet street of white fences and trimmed hedges. I wanted to slam the door, but my pride stopped me. I stood taller, even though my voice cracked. "You're not real cops, and I know it." Their smiles faded, replaced with anger. One of them leaned in so close I could smell his breath, sharp with coffee and something bitter. "You think the sheriff is going to help you? We run this street, not him." That was it. The moment I decided, I wasn't backing down. I told them to wait. I stepped inside, grabbed my phone, and dialed the sheriff's office. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear the ring. When I stepped back outside, the scene had changed. The fake cops weren't waiting calmly anymore. One was pacing across my lawn, his boots crushing the grass. The other had walked over to my neighbor's porch, knocking on their door, telling them lies about me. "Dangerous man," he said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Doesn't follow rules, won't respect the HOA." Curtains in the neighborhood started moving, eyes peeking from windows, whispers floating in the air, and I stood there, caught between fear and fury. Was this their game? To embarrass me until I broke? To make me the villain of my own street? I felt trapped, like the world had shrunk down to this one block, and everyone was watching. But I also felt something else, a spark, a fire in my chest. Because if there's one thing I hate, it's bullies who think they can win just by scaring people. The phone pressed against my ear. The sheriff's office picked up. I explained everything fast, my words tumbling over each other. The dispatcher stayed calm, asked me to stay on the line. And then she said the words I was waiting for. "We're sending someone right away." Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long because the fake HOA cops had noticed me on the phone, and now they looked furious. The tall one stormed back across the lawn. "Who are you calling?" he barked. His voice was so loud even the dog across the street started barking. I didn't answer. I just stared at him, letting silence be my answer. His partner stepped closer, grabbing the edge of my trash bin and tipping it over. Trash spilled across the street. Neighbors gasped from their porches. My face turned red with anger. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. And for a moment, I believed him. But then, I heard it. The low rumble of an engine, growing louder, closer. A black and white sheriff's cruiser turning onto the street. The fake cops froze. Their confidence melted. Just like that. And I, for the first time that morning, smiled. The real sheriff was here, and he was about to change everything. The cruiser stopped right in front of my house. Red and blue lights bouncing off the windows. The sound alone made my neighborhood hold its breath. The sheriff stepped out slowly, one hand resting on his belt, the other shading his eyes against the sun. He was calm, but you could feel the weight of his presence. A man used to control, used to respect. The fake HOA cops stiffened. They tried to stand tall, but their faces betrayed them. Pale skin, twitching eyes, nervous hands brushing their fake badges. "Morning, gentlemen," the sheriff said. His voice rolled across the street like thunder. "Care to tell me what's going on here?" The tall one cleared his throat. "Sir, we're just enforcing community law." He lifted his chin, like he actually believed it. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Community law?" His hand tapped his radio, slow, steady. "And you two are HOA cops," the short one blurted out. The words hung in the air like smoke, somewhere down the street. I heard a laugh escape from behind a curtain. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "HOA cops? Never heard of that department." For a second, nobody moved. The fake cops shifted on their feet, their boots grinding against the pavement. The sheriff stepped closer, his shadow falling over both of them. "Badges? Now." They hesitated. Too long. Way too long. When they finally pulled them out, even from a distance you could see it. Cheap metal. Toy-like shine. No weight of authority. The sheriff didn't even need to touch them. His smirk said it all. "Funny thing," he muttered. "These look like something I could buy off the internet for $20. My neighbors leaned further out from their porches, whispers spreading like wildfire. People recording with their phones now. Everyone waiting for the sheriff's next move. The tall fake cop tried to recover. "These are authorized by the board. We have full power in this neighborhood." The sheriff chuckled, not a friendly chuckle, the kind that says you've already lost. "Full power, huh?" he said. "Well, let's see how much power you've got down at the county jail." My heart leapt justice, finally. But before the sheriff could grab them, the short one panicked. He shoved the trash bin again, sending cans rolling into the street. He pointed at me, his voice rising like a desperate actor. "He's the criminal. He refuses to follow HOA law. He's a danger to this community." For a moment, I felt the eyes of my neighbors shift back to me. Their cameras pointed my way. My stomach knotted. Was I about to become the villain in their story? The sheriff didn't flinch. He turned, looked me in the eye, and asked one question. "Did you call us?" I nodded, my voice finally steady. "Yes, I did." The sheriff's eyes softened, but only for a second. Then he turned back to the fake cops, and his face hardened like stone. That's all I needed to know, in one smooth motion. He reached for the tall one's arm. The man tried to pull back, but the sheriff twisted his wrist with ease. The badge clattered to the ground. The other man froze, his mouth opening but no words coming out. The neighborhood gasped as the sheriff pressed them against the cruiser, their fake authority crumbling with every second. The street that once feared them was now laughing at them. But as I watched, I couldn't shake the thought. How many times had they gotten away with this before? How many people had they bullied into silence? And more importantly, how deep did this go? Because if two board members could dress up as fake cops, what else was the HOA hiding? The sheriff's cruiser disappeared down the street, the fake cops sitting in the back seat, heads bowed low. And for the first time in weeks, my neighborhood felt quiet again. But quiet in this place never lasts. That night, I walked out to the mailbox. The air was cool. The streetlights flickered like they were hiding secrets. My neighbors were still awake. But instead of greetings, I got stares. Not angry stares, not friendly either, just long, curious stares. They had seen what happened. They had filmed it, shared it, whispered about it. And now, I was the center of the neighborhood story. When I lifted the mailbox lid, a letter was waiting for me. Not a normal letter. The envelope was thick, with the HOA's official stamp in bold red ink. I ripped it open. My ear had already racing. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed neatly. No signature, just one line. You made a mistake calling the sheriff, and mistakes have consequences. I froze under the streetlight. The paper shook in my hands. The shadows of the trees seemed to creep closer. It wasn't a fine. It wasn't a warning about grass length or mailbox color. It was a threat. And I knew the game had only just begun. The next morning, I heard the sound of voices outside. I peeked through the blinds. 3 board members stood at the corner, clipboards in hand, whispering, pointing at my house, scribbling notes like vultures circling prey. They thought they could scare me with letters and stares, but I wasn't going to let them win. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, my feet bare on the driveway. "Morning," I said loud enough for the whole block to hear. Their heads snapped toward me. They didn't smile. They didn't answer. They just wrote something down and walked away. That silence told me everything. They weren't finished. The next week was a storm of paper, violation letters stuffed into my mailbox, each one pettier than the last. Grass 1 inch too long, fence paint slightly faded, mailbox not in compliance with reflective standards. It was endless, day after day. New violations, and each letter carried a fine. By the end of the week, they claimed I owed more than $2,000. I laughed when I read it, but the laughter didn't last, because my neighbors started avoiding me. Mothers pulled their kids closer when I walked by. Old men watering their lawns refused to look up, and at night, I saw porch lights flick on when I stepped outside, eyes always watching. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about isolation. They wanted me to break, but then something strange happened. A knock on my door again. Not heavy, not like before. This one was soft, almost shy. When I opened it, I found an envelope. Inside, a note written by hand. "You're not the only one they're after. Meet me by the cul-de-sac bench after dark." No name, no address, just fear scribbled in shaky letters. I hesitated. It could be a trap, but something in me needed answers. So that night, when the street was quiet and the crickets were singing, I walked to the bench at the end of the cul-de-sac. A man was waiting, thin, older, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He looked around nervously before speaking. "They did it to me, too," he whispered. "Fines, threats, humiliation, until I gave up." I leaned closer. "What do you mean, gave up?" "They forced me to sell my house, under market value. Bought it through one of their friends." His voice cracked. "They ruin people here, one at a time. And now, it's your turn." The world seemed to tilt. This wasn't just petty HOA drama. This was a machine built to crush anyone who stood against it. I walked back home that night with a knot in my stomach. Every shadow felt alive. Every sound felt louder. And when I reached my porch, I found another letter waiting. No envelope this time, just a folded piece of paper stuck under the mat. "We warned you once. Now you'll see what happens when people don't listen." I stared at it under the porch light. The words burned into my mind. My chest felt heavy. My hands clenched tight. This wasn't about trash bins anymore. This was about power. And I had just stepped into a war. The days that followed blurred together. Strange cars parked near my house late at night. Notes slipped under my door. Neighbors whispering and pointing whenever I walked outside. It felt like living in a cage built from paranoia. But deep down, a fire burned brighter. Because if this HOA thought I would bend, they picked the wrong man. And then, the twist came. A letter arrived. Not from the HOA. This one was from the county courthouse. Mal notice of a complaint filed against me. signed by the HOA president herself. They were taking me to court, claiming I was a danger to the community, a reckless homeowner, a constant violator. All lies, dressed in legal language. My heart sank. Court meant money, stress, risk. But court also meant one thing the HOA feared most: exposure. And I decided right then, if they wanted a fight in front of a judge, I was going to give them one they'd never forget. The letter from the courthouse sat heavy in my hands. The paper felt colder than paper should feel, and the words on it cut deeper than I wanted to admit. The HOA wasn't just sending threats anymore. They were dragging me into a courtroom. They wanted to make an example out of me, to show the neighborhood what happens when someone fights back. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house made me jump. Every car passing outside made me think they were watching. And maybe they were. By morning, I had made my decision. If they wanted war, they would get war. The courthouse smelled like dust and old wood polish. Its walls echoed with whispers and shuffling feet. I stood outside the courtroom doors, my palms sweating, my stomach tight. The HOA president was already there, a woman in a gray suit, pearls around her neck, and eyes sharp as glass. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Her smile said everything. That smug little curve of her lips told me she thought the battle was already won. When the bailiff called us in, the room filled with silence. Neighbors sat in the benches behind, some curious, some eager to watch me burn, phones tucked into hands, ready to record every second. The judge walked in, heavy robe, tired eyes. A man who had seen too many battles like this. But this one felt different. The HOA president stood first. Her voice was honey sweet. But her words were poison. Your Honor, this homeowner has repeatedly violated community rules. She listed them one by one. Trash bins, grass height, mailbox placement. Her voice never shook, never faltered, like she believed these rules were as sacred as law itself. I wanted to laugh, but my throat was dry because with every word, I saw my neighbors nodding along, not because they believed her, but because they feared her. When she finished, she placed her hands neatly on the table. Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp, cutting, victorious. The judge turned to me. Your response? I stood. My knees felt weak, but my voice had fire. Your Honor, none of this is about trash bins or grass height. I held up the stack of letters they had shoved into my mailbox. This is about power, and about punishing me for calling the sheriff when they pretended to be cops. Gasps rippled through the room. The HOA president's smile faded. For the first time, I told the judge everything. The fake badges, the threats, the neighbor who confessed they'd been forced to sell. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just told the truth, plain and steady, and for the first time since this nightmare began. I saw something shift in the room. People leaned forward, eyes widened. Whispers turned into murmurs. The judge held up a hand, quiet in the court. But even he looked unsettled. The HOA president scrambled. She called me a liar, said I had no proof. But then, something happened I didn't expect. The old man from the cul-de-sac stood up from the back row. His voice cracked, but his words carried. It's true. They did the same thing to me, and I lost my home because of it. The room erupted. More neighbors stood, some nodding, some finally speaking, one by one. Stories spilled out like broken pipes. Unfair fines, threats, harassment, fake letters slipped under doors. It was all out now. The HOA president's face turned pale, her lips trembling. Her kingdom of control was collapsing right in front. And of her, the judge pounded the gavel. Order, order in the court. But the order was gone. The truth had taken its place. When the hearing ended, the judge announced an investigation. The board would be audited, every action reviewed, and until then, they were stripped of their authority. The president stormed out of the room, her heels clicking like hammers. Her loyal board members followed close behind, their faces twisted with anger. I stood there, my knees still shaking, but my chest lighter than it had been in weeks. Neighbors approached me, some apologizing for staying silent, others thanking me for speaking up. and for the first time, I didn't feel alone. But victory is never that simple in suburbia. That night, I came home to find my front yard vandalized, spray paint across the driveway, my mailbox smashed into pieces, and on the hood of my car, a note scrawled in red ink. This isn't over. I stood there in the glow of my porch light, fists clenched, heart pounding. The battle wasn't finished. The board had lost in court, but outside the courtroom, they still had teeth. And I knew. The war for this neighborhood was only getting darker. The red spray paint glowed under my porch light like fire. The smashed mailbox leaned in the dirt like a broken tooth. And that note on my car, 3 words, burned into my mind. This isn't over. I picked it up slowly, my hands trembling. The night air felt heavy, like even the silence was watching me. The sheriff had stripped the board of their power, at least on paper, but paper doesn't stop people. Paper doesn't stop revenge. That night, I didn't sleep. Every sound outside made me sit up. Every shadow against the blinds made my heart race. And when the sprinklers clicked on at 3 a.m., I nearly jumped out of bed the morning after the vandalism. I stepped outside to survey the Dama. Gee, neighbors peeked from their windows, but no one came close. Some shook their heads. Others just looked away. The cul-de-sac felt colder than usual. Like the entire street had chosen silence over justice. I called the sheriff. An officer came, clipboard in hand, camera flashing over the red paint. He wrote a report, nodded along as I explained. But when I asked if they would catch who did it, he just sighed. Hard to prove anything without cameras, he said. And just like that, I realized something. The HOA might have lost their titles, but they still had their army of silence, people who would never admit what they saw, or who did it. That silence was their shield. I decided I needed my own shield, so I installed cameras, one on the porch, one facing the street. I even bought motion lights, flooding my yard with brightness whenever something moved for the first time. I felt like I was fighting back, but the HOA wasn't done. They found new ways to attack. It started small. Anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, silence on the other end, letters slipped under my door. Not with threats, but with insults. Rule breaker, community trash, sheriff's pet. Each note written in the same shaky handwriting. Each one meant to dig under my skin. Then came the rumors. I heard them at the grocery store. Whispered between aisles, I heard them at the gas station. Neighbors muttering under their breath. Stories about me that weren't true, that I was dangerous, violent, unstable. The HOA might have lost in court, but in the court of whispers, they were winning. One evening, I stepped outside and saw the old man from the cul-de-sac sitting on the bench, the same man who had spoken up in court, his cap pulled low, his hands shaking as he smoked. I sat beside him. He didn't look at me, just stared at the smoke rising into the streetlights. "They'll never stop," he muttered. "Not until you break or leave." His words were heavy, too heavy. I asked him why people stayed quiet, why no one else stood up. He turned to me then, his eyes tired, full of something I couldn't name. "Because we built our cages," he said softly. "Perfect lawns, white fences, fake smiles. And the board holds the key." His words sank into me. The cages weren't just theirs. They were mine too. Days turned into weeks. The sheriff's office said the investigation into the board was still ongoing. But ongoing doesn't stop late-night vandalism. Ongoing doesn't stop whispered rumors. Ongoing doesn't stop the feeling that the whole neighborhood is watching you crack. I started to feel the weight, the exhaustion, the paranoia, the anger boiling just under my skin. And then, it happened again. One night, my motion light snapped on. The camera recorded everything. 2 figures in hoodies sneaking across my lawn. One carried a can of spray paint, the other a hammer. They didn't know the light was on. Didn't see the camera blinking. I watched from inside, my fists clenched, my teeth grinding. Every muscle in me screamed to run outside, to catch them, to end it. But I stayed still. I let the camera do the work. When they finished, my garage door was covered in red. One word this time: out. The sheriff came the next morning. I showed him the footage. Clear faces under those hoodies, 2 board members, finally. Proof. The officer whistled low, shaking his head. Guess they didn't learn, he said. And for once, I felt like the weight was lifting. This wasn't just my word anymore. This was evidence. But the board still had claws. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing with a new rumor that I had faked the video, edited it, doctored the evidence. Neighbors shook their heads at me, whispering as I passed. It didn't matter what was true anymore. It only mattered what people believed, and too many believed them. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the camera footage replaying. On my laptop, spray paint dripping across my garage, the words screaming back at me. I thought about moving, packing up, leaving the cage behind. But then I remembered the sheriff's cruiser pulling up that first day. I remembered the board president's smug smile in court. I remembered the old man's voice. They'll never stop. And I realized, if I left, they won. Not just against me, but against everyone who had ever been crushed under their rules. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every neighbor who stayed silent out of fear. The board wanted me out, but I wasn't leaving. Not now, not ever. The video of the vandals sat on my laptop screen. Clear faces, 2 board members, spray paint dripping from their hands. It was the proof I had been waiting for. But proof doesn't always bring peace. In fact, sometimes proof only makes enemies more dangerous. The sheriff's office called me 2 days later. They asked me to come in, bring the footage, make a formal statement. When I walked into that small room at the station, the smell of coffee and old paper filled the air. The sheriff himself sat across from me, his hat on the desk, his eyes heavy with patience. "Looks like you've stirred up a hornet's nest," he said. I slid the laptop across the table, played the footage again. He watched in silence, nodding slowly. Board members, caught in the act. Can't argue with that. For the first time, I felt like the ground under my feet was steady. The law was on my side. The sheriff promised charges would be filed. Fines, maybe even jail time. And I walked out of that station with a little hope burning in my chest. But hope is fragile in a neighborhood like mine. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, I noticed cars parked along the cul-de-sac. Too many cars, engines still warm, lights off. People inside, watching. The board was planning something. I could feel it in my bones. Later that night, a note appeared in my mailbox. No envelope, no name, just 4 words, scratched in black ink. Tonight, the clubhouse. My stomach tightened. The HOA clubhouse sat at the end of the street, a plain brick building with tinted windows. I had never been inside, never wanted to, but now, it was calling me like a trap. I should have ignored it. I should have stayed home, locked the doors, let the sheriff handle it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and fear makes you bold in strange ways. I parked my car 2 blocks away, walked through the shadows until I reached the clubhouse. Lights spilled through the blinds. Voices murmured inside. I crept closer, pressed my ear against the wall. The HOA president's voice cut sharp through the air. "We can't let him destroy everything we've built," she hissed. "He's turning the neighbors against us, bringing the sheriff down on us. If we don't stop him now, we lose." A man's voice replied, low and bitter. "Then we take it further. Fines aren't enough. Rumors aren't enough. We make him leave." My heart pounded. I leaned closer, straining to hear every word. Another voice joined in, shaky but angry. "The sheriff won't help us anymore, so we help ourselves. The board was here long before him, and it'll be here long after." I froze. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about their power, their control, their grip on this entire street. Then, the president spoke again. "If the law won't silence him, the neighborhood will." The room erupted in agreement. Murmurs, whispers. A plan forming in the dark, and I realized I wasn't just fighting an HOA. I was fighting a cult of control, one that had infected my neighbors for years. I slipped back into the night before they saw me. Every step home felt heavier, like the shadows were chasing me. By the time I locked my front door, sweat was dripping down my back and my mind was racing. They weren't just going to find me. They weren't just going to vandalize my property. They were going to turn the whole neighborhood into a weapon against me, and maybe they already had. Rain hammered the rooftops. I sat in my living room, the lights flickering with each strike of lightning, and then another knock on my door. Not soft, not hard, just steady. I froze. My chest tightened. I stood slowly, opened the door, and there they were. Not the sheriff, not the police, the HOA president herself, soaked in rain, pearls hanging loose around her neck, eyes burning with rage. Behind her, 2 loyal board members, their faces pale, their suits clinging wet to their skin. She didn't wait for me to speak. "You ruined everything," she hissed, her voice cracked with fury. "You think you've won? You haven't. You've destroyed this community." I gripped the door tighter. "This community was never yours to own," I said, but my voice trembled, because I could see something in her eyes. Desperation. The kind that makes people dangerous. She stepped closer. "This street was perfect until you came, and when you're gone, it will be perfect again." Lightning lit her face for a split second, and in that flash, she looked less like a president and more like a villain stripped of her crown. Before I could answer, red and blue lights cut through the rain. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up to the curb, doors slammed, boots splashed against the wet pavement. "Step away from the door!" the deputy shouted. The board members froze. The president's eyes widened, her jaw clenched tight. But it was too late. The sheriff himself walked up through the storm, his hat dripping with water, his voice steady as stone. "It's over," he said. What happened next felt unreal. The deputies moved fast. Handcuffs clicked against wrists. The president screamed about powers, about rules, about her kingdom of lawns and fences. Her loyal members shouted too. But the storm drowned them out. Neighbors spilled onto porches, umbrellas in hand, cameras flashing in the rain. They watched and subimos as the people who had ruled them for years were led away in the back of cruisers. The HOA, the monster in the middle of our quiet street, was gone. I stood there in the doorway, soaked from the rain blowing in. The sheriff gave me a long look. "Sometimes," he said, "bullies need a spotlight, and you gave them one." I wanted to thank him, but my throat was tight, so I just nodded. When the cruisers pulled away, silence fell again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't fear anymore. It was freedom. The next morning, I woke to something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. No flyers on my porch, no stares from neighbors, no threats in my mailbox. Instead, my neighbors waved when I stepped outside. Some even smiled. The old man from the cul-de-sac walked by and tipped his cap. "You cracked the cage," he said softly, and for the first time, I believed him. Weeks passed. The sheriff's investigation tore the HOA apart, bank accounts frozen, secret deals exposed, fines reversed. The neighborhood began to heal. Lawns still got trimmed, mailboxes still stood straight, but now, it wasn't about control, it was about choice. And as for me, I sat on my porch one evening, the sun setting over the cul-de-sac, a cup of coffee in my hands, for once. The quiet felt like real quiet. The war was over, at least, this war. But deep down, I knew something. Wherever there's power, there's abuse. Wherever there's a board, there's a bully, and wherever there's an HOA, there's a story waiting to be told. But let me ask you something. If your HOA leaders were finally exposed, dragged out in handcuffs, their lies laid bare for the whole neighborhood to see, would you forgive them once the dust settled? Or would you make sure their names were never forgotten? As a warning to every board that came after. Tell me in the comments, because maybe the real question is this: do we ever truly beat the HOA? Or do we just survive it? The next morning, it began. A woman from 2 houses down walked past my yard, stopped, and snapped pictures of my driveway. An hour later, a man I'd never spoken to before shoved a flyer into my mailbox. "Protect our community. Stop rule breakers," it read. My name wasn't on it, but it didn't need to be. Everyone knew who it was about. By evening, the whispers were louder. I saw heads turning when I drove past. I saw kids point at my house and laugh, and when I stepped outside to take in the mail, someone shouted from across the street, "Sell your house already!" The words hit harder than a fist because that's what they wanted. Not justice, not peace, just control. That night, I called the sheriff again. I told him everything I'd overheard at the clubhouse. He listened, but his side told me what I already feared. Without recordings or witnesses, it's just your word against theirs. My fists clenched around the phone. What about the vandalism footage? Isn't that enough? It'll help, he said. But people like this, they slip through cracks. They stall. They threaten. They twist the story until no one remembers the truth. I hung up, feeling heavier than before, because even the law had cracks, and the HOA had been living in those cracks for years. The days blurred after that. Flyers appeared on more porches, letters slipped under more doors, and every time I walked outside, I felt the eyes, watching, judging, waiting. It wasn't just about rules anymore. It was psychological warfare. They wanted me to feel like a stranger in my own home. And worst of all, it was working. I started talking less to neighbors, stopped waving when cars passed, even when friends visited. I kept glancing at the blinds because I knew someone was always watching. One night, as I sat by the window, I thought about leaving again, packing up, selling, disappearing into another town where no one knew me. But then, the old man's words echoed in my head. Because we built our cages. And I realized something. If I left, the cage stayed. The board would still rule, still crush, still own this street, and maybe they'd find their next victim right after me. That thought lit a fire inside me, a fire I hadn't felt since the first knock on my door. I wasn't leaving. I wasn't giving in, not to them, not to their flyers, not to their whispers. If they wanted war with me, they were going to get it. The flyers piled up on my porch like dead leaves, each one screaming the same lie. Protect our community. Stop rule breakers. I stopped reading them after a while, but I couldn't stop feeling them. Every sheet of paper was a reminder that the board wasn't finished, that even stripped of their titles, they still pulled strings in the dark, and I was the puppet they wanted to cut. Then came the letter that changed everything. Not a flyer, not a fake fine, a real letter from the county clerk's office. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to every homeowner in our neighborhood. Inside was an official notice. The HOA was under full investigation, financial records, property sales, secret contracts. The sheriff hadn't given up after all. He had pulled the thread. And now the whole sweater was unraveling. The next week, the neighborhood buzzed with fear. Some neighbors avoided eye contact even more than before. Others whispered nervously in driveways. But something was different now. The silence was cracking. People began to realize what the board had been hiding. The overpriced fines, the forced sales, the fake violations. It wasn't about keeping lawns neat. It was about lining pockets. And for the first time, the neighbors weren't whispering about me. They were whispering about the board. I thought maybe the worst was behind me. Maybe the cage was finally breaking. But then, the night of the storm came. Thunder rolled across the cul-de-sac.